everyone, and welcome to the Priceless Podcast. This podcast is in partnership with the European Forum of LGBT Christian Groups. If there will be any links for this podcast, and I know that there will, you will find them in the podcast description. Please share this podcast, like it, subscribe to it. And if you just want to listen to the audio version, you can find it on your favorite podcast app just by searching The Priceless Podcast. So, today I have a guest that I wanted to introduce as Princess Diana. No, I'm sorry, it's a mistake. She's Dr. Carol Shepherd. This was an internal joke. I'm sorry, I just had to. And maybe she's going to explain why. So Dr. Carol Shepherd is a doctor of sociology, and she wrote many interesting books, and I believe that she will mention some, and you will find the links in the podcast description. So again, a very interesting guest, and I could talk to her about so many things, but today we're going to talk mainly about bisexuality. So, hello, Carol, and welcome, and thank you so much for being my guest.
Hello, this is Dr. Diana Spencer, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today. Actually, it's Carol. Thank you. It's an absolute privilege to be a guest. I love Michal. I love his podcast. I also think he's a very funny guy. So thank you for having me.
And thank you for saying that I'm funny, because you're probably one of the rare people that thinks so. I don't know, or at least one of the rare people that said so. So thank you.
You see, in English, we have a saying, funny ha-ha or funny peculiar.
Okay. So this will be a mystery. Am I funny haha or am I funny peculiar?
Do add to the comments box, people.
Yeah. Go to the comments box and leave a comment. Am I funny haha or am I funny peculiar? So, okay, maybe we'll find out. Okay, Carol. So for our listeners and viewers, how could you introduce yourself a little bit more? Could you say a few more sentences about yourself and who you are?
Okay, well, I will begin for listeners by saying I'm a European.
Yay!
Yay! I was born in Scotland, grew up in Wales, and have lived all my adult life in the south of England. So I am truly fully British, though I have not lived in Northern Ireland yet, but give it time. I am a follower of Jesus Christ. Began my journey as a Christian at the age of 17. Around about the same time, I knew for sure that I was bisexual / lesbian. I was not quite sure at that point. I was married to a man for just over 20 years. I have 3 children. Well, they're big, actually. They're all bigger than me now. Maybe not my daughter, but the 2 boys are much bigger than me. And I teach sociology to 16 to 18-year-olds, but also to adults. And that's my day job. And in my spare time, I do writing and publishing and public speaking. Obviously, a lot of that's been affected by lockdown, but we're discovering online podcasts and stuff like that, which is all super exciting.
And it's happening right now again. You're a guest on a podcast. Yay. So how you already said that you consider yourself bisexual. What about how do you identify with your gender?
I am cisgendered. I identify as female, pronouns she, her. Absolutely not an issue for me whatsoever. Have many close trans friends, but I do fully identify as female. And bisexual, not pansexual. I do kind of note the gender of people, and I would say that gender does matter to me, which makes me bisexual rather than pan. But I know they get conflated a lot, and I wouldn't say I was 100% clear in my own head what all the differences were, but I certainly, bisexual feels like a good descriptor for me, an accurate one.
So I want to dive right in with a question and ask you...
Oh, I'm so shy.
Well, I hope you won't be by answering this question, because what do you think, or what is your experience that the biggest misconception about bisexual people is?
The biggest misconception, promiscuity, probably. Closely followed by you're a serial liar and you're clearly a lesbian. But the promiscuity is probably the big one, and that's the one that's the most threatening within Christian communities. Evidence of that, the notorious issues in human sexuality, which if you are going to be ordained in ministry in the UK, you have to read and swear to stand by. And it's a very interesting document. I've spoken about it before, but obviously you'll have other listeners that haven't heard me talk. It is a 43-page document about human sexuality, and there are 17 pages on the phenomenon of homosexual love. So if you are homosexual, you are phenomenal in the eyes of the Church of England. Forget that. Ooh. And within those 17 pages of a 43-page document, there is one paragraph on bisexuality, paragraph 5.8, which has 119 words, which is significant. And in these 119 words, it basically says, as a matter of course, as a bisexual person, your life will involve adultery, and it throws that in alongside, stick to your straight side, because it's that easy, and go and see a counsellor for your potential personality disorder. So it's very unhelpful. It was widely criticised, but they haven't done anything about it, and that was 1991, when I was 20, and I'm now a bit older than that, so do the math. But yeah, it's that damaging assertion that if you're bisexual, you're adulterous. I could count on the fingers of one hand how many sexual partners I've had in my entire life, and I'm nearly 50. Which doesn't make me promiscuous. It actually makes me the absolute opposite, a bit of a walking chastity belt. So, it's crazy.
I just wanted to ask you how it is to be an adulteress, and now, what am I going to ask you?
I don't know. I mean, I'd be a rubbish adulteress because I get tired really easily. I have to have an afternoon nap. As far as I can get away with it, I like to have an afternoon nap. And my partner will testify to that. She now builds in hobbies to get on with whilst I'm having my afternoon nap. You're supposed to do that when you're 80, not 49, aren't you? So I certainly would not categorically have the energy to go around having multiple sexual partners. I'm just too old. Yeah. But actually, when I was younger, I liked to nap as well, so... Maybe I'm just lazy.
One thing that we're trying is just to fight putting people into boxes. So, it doesn't matter. I think that we're all different.
A nice box for cushions is fine.
Okay, I'll be sure if I put you in a box to put a lot of cushions inside.
Yeah, make it comfortable.
I will.
I don't fit in a box, and that's what people can't get their head. That's why the church didn't like me. That's why a lot of Christian women I've met don't like me. I don't fit in a box. I find men attractive. I do have a sex romance split thing, which is quite common amongst bisexual people. I have sexual attraction to men, but I don't feel romantic about men. I have romantic attraction to women and sexual attraction to women, which is probably why female relationships work better for me. But I'm far more likely to look at a guy walking down the street in tight Levi's than a woman. And if I'm watching a film with, naked bodies in them, which makes it sound like I've got a porn issue, and I don't. Please, people. But I would find looking at the guy with no clothes on more than looking at the woman with no clothes on. But in terms of long-term relationship, in terms of romance, in terms of candlelit dinners, it's a woman. And that's what makes me bi rather than pan as well, because I do notice gender. Yeah, so I don't fit in a box. I don't want to have... There's no problem with people doing this, but I personally don't want to dress in a way that's quite butch. I don't identify with that. But neither do I'm not a lipstick lesbian. I don't walk around with loads of makeup on either. I just don't fit in the lipstick lesbian. I don't fit in the butch lesbian. Probably because I'm not a lesbian. But there is a kind of bi culture of having blue and purple hair. And I'm not into that either. And I've been to bisexual conferences and I don't kind of fit in there because there isn't the Christian element. And there's nothing that's just bisexual and Christian. Yeah. There's no support groups, nothing. And it's curious because we're over half of the LGBT community. Because trans is a gender identity issue. But in terms of sexual orientation, 52% bi. Is it 31% gay men, 17% lesbian? I might have those two the wrong way around, but I think it's that way around. But it's 52% bisexual. Yet nothing out there. You have to write it yourself. Yeah. So,
well, and that's something you did. I mean, the first time I met you, I don't even know if you remember, because most of the people don't remember me from...
Gothenburg.
Yes, you do remember me.
Yeah, you were with Neda?
Yes,
you were with Neda, weren't you?
Yes,
I was there with shy.
Well, I was sick when I was there. So I had a fever and I was most of the time in my hotel room.
I just thought you were very shy and we'd scared you away.
You know, I am kind of introverted, which many people wouldn't say when they watch this podcasts. And, you know, because I also did singing. I'm a jazz singer and did many different things.
Like Neil Diamond.
Not really, but I was, you know, like when I have a role, when I know what I have to do, it's very easy for me to be outspoken and in front of people on a stage or whatever. But, you know, if I'm somewhere where there are a lot of people, then I get a little bit shy. But okay, now we're getting into me, but maybe we'll do that really someday later.
We are going to do that, okay? Note to listeners, I am desperate to interview Mihail.
Yes, Carol wants to expose me. Who is Mihail?
I want to expose him, this amazing jazz singer who hides in hotel rooms.
Yes, who goes to conferences and
yes,
stays
I
in
know.
rooms.
I met you in Sweden in the hotel where the beer was about £8 a pint. You couldn't get drunk unless you were very wealthy in that hotel.
Yes, and we are unfortunately not.
Yeah, and you had a female minder with you.
Yes.
Yes, she was very nice. I talked to her a lot. But I did think you were very sweet but very shy.
Yeah, and I am. Yeah, I am.
Sweet.
But let's go back to you. So we are not talking about me right now. So Carol, behave.
Yeah.
Okay, you'll get your chance, I promise.
Good.
So on your way, I remember back then, you know, it's talking about the topic of bisexuality is not just something that is taboo in churches or between hetero people, but there are also so many misconceptions and just wrong things that are being said or just disregarded within the LG community, maybe mainly.
Yeah.
So, you know, how was your journey of, you know, you became kind of the voice within the European Forum for bi people, not just within the European Forum, but also wider because you wrote books, some of the first books about bisexuality, because there are not many out there, especially not from a Christian perspective. So how was that journey for you, and how is it for you to be there in front of this whole movement, maybe even that you're starting?
Yeah. I'm glad that you kind of it separated out. I mean, maybe not intentionally, L, G, B, and T. Tend to have a lot more in common with the T community as a bisexual person, because also in that non-binary space where you don't fit in a box, and sexual orientation for bisexuality, it might be sexual orientation, but there's gender ID non-binary with trans community, and we have a lot in common, and that has been a fruitful avenue for me as well. I'm not, if I ally with trans people, I have a community. If I ally with bi Christians, it's quite lonely. There are bi Christians and I know them, but they're scared to talk because there's so much stigma around being bi. And obviously, I'll go back to your question in a minute, but obviously if you're in a relationship with an opposite sex person, they're not very keen on you broadcasting to the world that you are attracted to another gender. And the same within a same-sex relationship. If you have a lesbian partner, I mean, I'm fortunate. I met my fiance when I was already an out bisexual public speaker and writer, so she knew what she was letting herself in for. But I can imagine if you're in a relationship with a same-sex partner, they're going to feel quite threatened if you're bisexual. But really, there shouldn't be any more threatened than anyone who is a living being with sexual attraction to other people. My journey, I started, I'm just trying to think, in terms of my bisexual journey and writing about it and public speaking, I started doing a doctorate thinking about it in 2013. So I was already in my early 40s. Up till then, a few friends knew I identified as bisexual, but I was married with young children and it wasn't appropriate to really do a whole lot about it. You have to put your kids first, when they're little and you live in a small community. Keeping them safe and happy has to be a priority as a parent, I think. And we'll talk about parenting later, because that is a big difference. When you have kids and you're in LGBT circles, it puts you in a completely different place to most people. But I went to a public lecture at the University of Winchester. It is a very nice little university in a very posh place in the south of England. Year in, year out, gets voted the most desirable place to live in the UK. So I lowered the tone considerably by being there. And I was at this talk on same-sex marriage led by the theologian Adrian Thatcher from the University of Exeter. And there was a lady chairing it that, unknown to me, was a very well-known feminist theologist called Lisa Isherwood. And the guy talking said something I didn't quite agree with, and I stood up in the questions at the end and said, well, actually, I think you'll find blah, 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 the concept of covenant in the Bible, blah, 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 sounding a bit pretentious. And then she came up to me afterwards and she's Welsh, so she had a very, very strong Welsh accent. She said, have you got a master's degree? And I went, yeah. And she said, would you like to do a PhD with me? And after I'd spat her arm out, yes, please. Anyway, I looked her up on Amazon. Lo and behold, it is Lisa Isherwood, who's written all sorts of famous books about feminist liberation theology. And I was working with her, and I was excited about it, but she was trying to take me in a direction I didn't want to go in, which was this kind of ivory tower, post-structural, highly theoretical looking at bisexuality. And that wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to be out in the street, interviewing church leaders, interviewing bisexual Christians, being a kind of an investigative journalist almost. I don't know if you know Louis Theroux. He's a kind of Louis Theroux person. And she wasn't having it. And it wasn't really working very well.
Mm.
And then I did a paper on bisexuality called From Barnacles to Bowie, because the very first mention of bisexuality was about sea mollusks and barnacles. And it was, a kind of pop culture sort of academic paper on bisexuality. And this American guy hollers from the back of the room, "I want to work with you. I have $5,000 to fund bisexual research. I want to work with you. I have to work with you." And this was like really good for my ego, right in the middle of a talk. So, it's like my head was out here. And he sent some of his doctoral students to have lunch with me to suss me out, because he was worried I was a Christian because he's an atheist. And they went back to him. I found this out later, saying, no, she's really sound. She's very left-wing. She's not, a Bible basher at all. Anyway, I then started to talk to him and discovered he was Professor Eric Anderson, who is Californian and writes books about toxic masculinity and masculinity theory. And he was the first ever out homosexual games teacher in the US. He was a running coach, and he came out as a high school PE coach, and he was a bit notorious. And he's still a bit notorious. He's quite controversial, but he's very, very supportive and basically got my career going. And I started meeting with him secretly, and then he stole me from Lisa Isherwood, and I became his student, and he got me funding from the American Institute of Bisexuality, which is the biggest bisexual think tank in the world. And they gave me, $5,000, so I was able to go out to the US and interview people. I interviewed people at the Bisexual Resource Center in Boston, and then I went down to Texas, because it's the opposite. Went to the biggest LGBT church in the world, the Cathedral of Hope, the one with armed guards outside. And the guy, Neil Thomas, the pastor there, used to go to Winchester University. So that was amazing. And K. Renato Lings, our amazing guy that does all the translation work, he was one of Lisa Isherwood's students as well. So we all have this little link. And she got me to where I needed to be, but it just didn't work between us. But and then I did my doctoral thesis on bisexuality in the Western Christian Church, why the church needs to be more welcoming, because I discovered among the people I was interviewing, overall, UK, US, 88% rate of depressive illness, and from anything from anxiety to suicide ideation. And this is staggeringly high. And I also interviewed pastors of churches and said, "What are you doing for bisexual people?" Nothing. They didn't know anything about it. There were a few exceptions, and they were pretty much all United Church of Christ in the States and MCC here and in the States. But apart from a couple of pastors, none of them knew how to deal with bisexuality, actually knew nothing about it. There wasn't a single church other than MCC North London that had a leaflet about bisexuality. And in fairness, Shannon and I wrote that. It's only because Shannon's ultra aware. And this was just absolutely shocking. And when I was just finishing off my doctorate, Palgrave Macmillan, who are a big academic publisher, put a tweet out saying, if you're finishing your PhD and you'd like to get published and you work in gender and sexuality studies, give us a message. And I told them what I was doing, and they were like, "Wow, definitely, absolutely, nobody's doing that." So I got an academic book published straight away out of my doctoral research, and then that led to probably the two only other bisexual scholars, certainly in the UK, bisexual Christian scholars, or ones that write about faith, Andrew Yip and Alex Toft getting in touch, asking me to do a chapter for their book. And then Emil Malapard and Renata Baumgartner, who are big bi scholars in Europe. Emil, that I'd met at another conference, asked me to do a chapter for his book. So kind of got my name around European academic bi circles as well. Just to recant slightly, I don't want to talk about this in too much detail because it affects my family, but I did publish a book under a pseudonym about the way the Church of England and the Evangelical Church had dealt with me when I talked to them about being bisexual. And I published that book, 119, My Life as a Bisexual Christian, with the 119 going back to that booklet I told you about with 119 words on bisexuality. That was why it was called 119, My Life as a Bi Christian. And that book came about. I was, as we say in England, on gardening leave from a job where you're kind of about to get sacked, but they don't quite know what to do with you, so they put you on paid leave for a few months. So I was on gardening leave, which is very funny because I hate gardening, as anyone will tell you. Gardening is outdoor housework. I mean, I don't do indoor housework. Why would I want to do outdoor housework? I don't get it. I don't get gardening. That's what you pay gardeners for. Where was I? Gardening leave, yeah. This happens a lot. You'll get used to it. So I'm on gardening leave, and I had thought, when is anyone ever going to pay me £30,000 a year for sitting at home doing nothing? I know, I'll write a book. And it took me 6 weeks and 6 days to write 80,000 words, 70,000, about 70,000 words. And it just came, you know?
Yeah.
I'm not very keen on moves of the spirit. It's a bit spooky for me. But it was that kind of, wow. And I sent it to Darton Longman Todd in London, DLT in London, who have a record for publishing LGBT faith stuff or anything minority and a bit left wing. And David, the editor, I put in the line bisexual Christian, because that in itself is a bit of an oxymoron for a lot of people. David got back to you immediately, said, I'm interested. Meet me in London. Anywhere you like. So we met in a bar near Waterloo Station because that's the closest station to where trains coming up from Hampshire. That's really boring. You didn't need to know that, but never mind. And
how was the weather?
I think it was a wet, cold day, which won't surprise you.
Thank you. I mean, it's important. I'm talking to a British person. We need to mention the weather somewhere.
And we've already done Diana. Now we've done the weather. Yes, so I think it was a wet, cold day, and we met in a French cafe, and he paid, which was lovely, near Waterloo. Lovely, it was lovely. It was splendid. And
scrumptious.
Scrumptious, truly scrumptious. Yes, he was very keen to publish it, but we had a lot of problems with the publicity because I wouldn't do it in my own name because of the age of my kids, because a lot of nasty stuff had happened in the area where I lived, and I didn't want to draw attention to myself. The book was geographically neutral. I changed the names of everyone, everything, even which bit of the country the book was in. And because I couldn't really publicise it, I did some online interviews, but he wanted me to go on the Jeremy Vine show on Radio 2, and I couldn't do it. I didn't go on Premier Christian Radio, not just because of the pseudonym thing, but also because I've just had such an awful time with conservative evangelicals that there was only one direction it was going to go in, and I didn't have the guts to do it. I would do it now.
Yeah.
But of course, they're not interested in doing it now because the book's 5 years old. Yeah. But Tina Beardsley did a marvelous podcast with them a few weeks ago, and she's just totally able to be herself, and that's what I would like to have done, but I couldn't at the time because of the age of the kids. So it didn't sell that well for that reason, because publicity is important, especially some of the stuff I had in there was reflected incredibly badly on church authorities. And that was a shame. But I do know a lot of people did buy it, and I've had some amazing people saying to me they'd never read anything like that. It was the first time they'd ever read anything that was about a bisexual Christian. So I'm, it's something I'm going to do something with in the future. I've talked to the editors and they're fine for me to use material from it. But it was just a shame that I wasn't free to do more with it at the time. But I'm still glad I did it, because writing it raw at the time when loads of stuff was happening was far more powerful than me trying to write about it now, for example. You tend to tone things down in retrospect. You didn't get the raw pain, and I think, it's good I did it.
Great. So looking from your research, but also from your own experience, what would you say are the specific challenges for bi people, or specifically bi Christians?
Yeah, it's quite a different kettle of fish as a bi Christian rather than just a bisexual person, and because the whole faith thing makes the reputations and the stigma around bisexuality worse in a faith context, because the stigmas are around promiscuity, around having multiple sexual partners. And I'm not anti-polyamory, and some bisexual therapist that I interviewed for my doctoral thesis said to me, better an honest duogamy, as in having two partners, than a dishonest monogamy. And I think there's a lot of truth in better an honest and accountable relationship with multiple partners than a deceptive marriage or a deceptive relationship. And I certainly felt I was deceptive when I was married, because I wasn't comfortable, and it wasn't healthy, and it wasn't good, and I didn't always behave well. And I now feel that I'm in a far better place. But and I'm not someone who tries to avoid responsibility. I was an adult and I made decisions that backfired on me in some respects and caused a lot of hurt. And I hold my hands up and say, not a perfect human being at all. However, without abdicating responsibility for my own actions, I do also think when you have church leaders who don't even know what bisexuality is, don't educate themselves on LGBT issues, which I find absolutely shocking, then you don't have support. And when you do get someone who is broad brush affirming, they tend to only know about homosexuality, and they think it's the same, and it's not. I have more in common with heterosexual women that have kids than I do with lesbian couples with no kids, because I like men and I have kids. And there's a lot of, you can get hostility, not from gay men. Gay men tend to, I get on well with men anyway. I'm far more comfortable with a room full of guys anyway. But lesbian women can be quite hostile, like you're a traitor to the cause because you're not denouncing all men, or you don't dislike the look of men. I've found that quite a lot. There's an assumption you're going to join their all-woman gangs and be part of women's things, and I don't want to be part of women's things. I don't have that sense all the time that I'm a woman. I'm just Carol. A woman. I just don't feel like that. And I think it can be a bit demonizing of men, and whilst I don't deny there's a lot of shit goes on with men, I have to say on the whole in my life men have been far more supportive of me than women. And I know that is not a very woke thing to say, but don't do wokery for wokery's sake. If I think something's true, I'll agree with it. If I don't, and I just don't identify with that, and don't really feel comfortable in all women's worship, women's conferences, things like that. It's just, it's not me. I'd rather be watching the football,
Yeah.
Come on, you Spurs. Yeah, very glad Gareth Bale's finding his form again. If there's any in likely event there's any football fans on this podcast.
Yeah. Sorry, not me.
How did I know you were going to say that?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Gay man football. Never the twain shall meet. So, where on earth was I? Oh yeah, bisexual people. Problems. Yeah, the assumption you're adulterous, or that you're always got one eye on the other gender or the other sex. The assumption that actually you're really a lesbian. And that you're just too scared to say so. I mean, that's particularly demeaning. You don't say to someone, come on, you voted Remain, but really you wanted to vote Brexit, didn't you? Didn't you? Didn't you? It's like... The lack of support just generally, really. I mean, I have a friend, there's a priest in the States that I'm an acquaintance of. I'm saying she's my friend, and that's really big-headed. She's an acquaintance. Reverend Janet Edwards, who is a Presbyterian priest she does write about being a bi Christian. Janet Edwards said that, if she wants to know about bisexual Christian stuff, she has to go just to do the talk herself. And I largely found that in order to meet other bisexual Christians, I've had to run an event or do a talk. And I know several bisexual Christians in the UK, and they thank me constantly for the work I'm doing. And I'm like, yeah, but come and join me. Come and do a talk with me. But they don't want to because they've had so much stigma about being bi, and a lot of it from the lesbian Christian community. Because women, we tend to be a bit more sensitive, and, a bloke will say something to you and you'll just go, yeah, piss off. But, with women, it's a bit like, and I think there's been quite a lot of hurt for bisexual Christian women I know who have tried to come out and say, actually, I'm bi.
Yeah.
A bit of rejection from the lesbian sisterhood stuff. And that, I'm more thick-skinned than they are. They have found that very hurtful. I'm probably quite able to rise above it because I've had so much awful stuff happen to me in the church and family rejection that it's a bit water off a duck's back when people say things to me. Rarely anything as bad anymore as stuff that's happened in church in the past or, with some family members. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm mostly an optimist, so I kind of believe that there are really people out there who want to be supportive. Not only that I believe, but I know that there are people out there and that there are people listening to this podcast or watching it and thinking, I want to be supportive to bi people. What would you give as a message? This is a way that you can support a bi person if you are not bi, of course.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think certainly within the European Forum that I'm a member of and various other organisations I dip my toes in, there's definitely more awareness. And some of that's because of the work of trans people saying it's not that simple.
Yeah.
That has helped. There is more awareness that it's not simple. Others, not as simple as they might think. The main thing is, there's several things. Firstly, as I kind of do in my talks quite a lot, there's a tendency to call things LGBT or LGBT plus, LGBTIA plus, whatever. Yes. And we see this all over most affirming LGBT Christian books.
Mm.
And they just say that, but they don't actually cover bisexuality.
Mm.
It's not even mentioned most of the time. They just give stories. They'll give a gay story, a lesbian story, maybe now a trans story, but it's still bisexuality that gets left out, yet with the biggest group.
Mm.
So that tells me that there's a lack of education and a lack of awareness, but also a fear of those bisexual Christians coming forward.
Yeah.
And it's kind of circular.
Yeah.
So please don't, if you're watching this and you're a pastor or you run a youth group or you in any way work with LGBT people, do not say LGBT on all your stuff if there's no content whatsoever that is specific to bisexual people.
Mm.
Yeah, because you're going to pick up that book and think, oh, great, a book for me. And then you take it home and there's nothing in there.
Mm.
All this stuff about David and Jonathan, and they make out David's a gay man. Really? Well, he saw a naked woman. He slept with her. He got her pregnant. He's definitely not a gay man. He might be bisexual.
Yeah.
He might be straight with a passionate friendship, but he's certainly not 100% homosexual. So you're kind of stealing the precious few bisexual people we've got. We need them. Ditto Ruth. Yeah. Not many lesbians I know would snuggle up in a bed with a man, but maybe she did do that to become, part of the kinship and to get financial security. Or maybe she didn't. We don't know, but we can't say 100% Ruth is really a lesbian.
Yeah.
So be honest about these things, but don't make out something's more clear-cut than it is.
Mm.
So that kind of thing is very hard. Sexual politics are a big thing. I totally get that gay men and lesbian women have had to fight long and hard to get their rights recognised.
Yeah.
And I get that. Of course I get that. And particularly for lesbians, because they've had to fight patriarchy and men being in charge. And, if you go to most LGBT things, there's a bald gay man in charge. I don't know what it is about bald gay men, but they seem to always be in charge of things. And
I didn't notice that. I have to.
Did you not? Oh my goodness, no. So many bald gay men. Maybe it's a UK thing, but if you go to LGBT things, most places, there's lots of bald gay men in charge. Clearly very stressful because they all lose their hair doing it. But
yeah, mine is also gone. A lot of it, anyway.
Yeah, you're okay. We don't want to be baldest. Sorry, sorry, people. Told you I wasn't very woke. So I get where they're coming from. And the thing that happens is what I call the Lady Gaga argument. I was born this way. Okay, and then they use that to say, don't discriminate against us. We're just born this way. God created us this way. So therefore, you coming along, who has the ability to fall in love and be sexually attracted to more than one gender, is a threat to that sexual identity politic. And you are seen to be a threat, and you're going to dilute their argument. You're going to water down their argument by saying, hold on. Yeah. Sometimes I like men, and sometimes I don't. But I don't feel like I was born a certain way. If I was born away, it was bisexual, but it wasn't one or the other.
Yeah.
And it's fluid as well. I'll have phases where I'm far more into men, and then phases where I just only look at women. The relationship I'm in, we're engaged, we're getting married. She's just, amazing. And I can't imagine being with anyone else. But what I don't want to do is become one of those smug people. Yeah. One of those, because what same-sex marriage has done is an amazing thing, but what it's also done is further entrench that binary of heterosexually married, same-sex marriage, and opposite-sex marriage and same-sex marriage, I should say. And it's kind of in a way made things worse for people who are non-binary, because it ignore, and it's also over and beyond that kind of smugness is very dangerous in church circles. We're supposed to be welcoming of people, not welcoming of couples.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be going on about marriage so much that anyone who is asexual or single or has a disability which would make marriage very difficult or is bereaved, we shouldn't be making people feel out of it or excluded because they're not in a partnership. And I don't want to, just because I'm now engaged to a woman, go down that road of being very smug and being exclusive and being very, how can I put it? Just dismissive that things are different for everybody. I don't want to become that person.
Yeah.
And I do see some of that. But I think in terms of the places I'm involved in, European Forum certainly feels more progressive than a lot of places I'm at, because they are asking people to talk about bi and trans. And, that's why I love being a part of it, because I feel welcomed. Yeah. I get quizzical looks, There are people that do not understand where I'm coming from, but I think the situation is definitely getting better. There's more people who are non-binary feeling empowered to say, actually, we need a group, or we need a pre-conference, or we need something that's for people who do not identify as exclusively gay, or who are not cisgendered, and I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
So we certainly have to have those spaces for people, just so we can talk through these stereotypes. It's good to talk about them.
Yeah.
The thing I found over and over again in my research is that silence is just as damaging, if not more damaging, than stigma. Because at least if the stigma, you are talking about it. Whereas silence is, bi, we don't have any bi people. We're not going to talk about bi because we don't know anything about it. Well, learn something about it. Buy a book. Buy my book. Buy Marie Alford Harkey's book in the US. There are other books. But for goodness sake, learn about it, because there's an awful lot of young people who are identifying as bi and pan, and they're not identifying as totally gay or totally straight. It's 54%, the last study I read, 16 to 24-year-olds don't identify as exclusively straight. So an awful lot of them are going to be what we call middle sexualities. So they're going to be non-binary, or they're going to be pan or bi. And what on earth is there for them if churches pretend nobody has genitals and it's all anti-erotic, and LGBT Christian groups just talk endlessly about lesbian and gay issues and occasionally trans? What is there for us? And that silence is very, very damaging. So better to have a talk. And I've done a couple at European Forum and other places where I have had what I call the kind of slitty eye treatment, where people are like the side on. It's all side on.
Let me practice.
Yeah, you have to.
Okay.
Are you sure you know what you're talking about, young lady?
Well, at least take a compliment, young lady. Take it.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
Yes, you just have to take the positives,
Yeah. And, but at least they're in the room. I tend to, when I get given a slot to speak, I'm always worried that no one will come because nobody's interested in bisexuality. But what usually happens is loads of people come.
Yeah.
Because nobody talks about it. Like, ooh. And I'm sure they think I'm going to talk about sex and porn, but I'm not normally. Other talks can be arranged.
Which doesn't mean that we shouldn't maybe talk about these topics, but that's not what you are talking about.
No, I mean, I don't know. I'm someone who likes to have a giggle and fun, but I'm not actually terribly into dangly bits and naked bodies. I really like Renato's stuff, and I like looking at scripture, and I like looking at alternative meanings of things and alternative relationship configurations, and the Bible's full of them. And I don't know, it's just opening people's minds and trying to. The thing is, we go to church as when we're pretending to be straight, you know. We go through this phase of going to church and trying to fit everyone's boxes, and then we come out the closet and go, I'm not going to fit in a box anymore. Or we might say it in a posh voice, go, I'm not going to fit in a box anymore, you know. And then we go to LGBT spaces and we immediately try to put everyone back in a box.
Yes.
And it's like, no, I'm not a lesbian.
Yeah.
No.
You know, I think it's really important. I don't think that we can really manage to live outside of boxes, but it's so important that we are aware. You know, even if we're stepping out of one box, we're stepping into another box. But the opportunity is there to step into a third box and a fourth box and to learn and keep learning and keep an open mind. And I'm so thankful that you're my guest, because, you know, that's one thing I want to do with this podcast, is kind of to have different stories, different perspectives, and that people can be different, you know, and that gay doesn't mean gay is not, you know, it doesn't mean gay the same thing for everyone, as well as lesbian, as well as bi, as well, you know, and for me it's actually you know, scary at the same time to see how LGBT was a great thing, but then having all of these people in the same group did a lot of damage to. Right now we are mentioning B and T, and, you know, probably also I and you know, all the other letters we have. So, you know, I'm glad that there are separate movements nowadays, you know, where people are aware, okay, we are different and there are always going to be differences, and we have to learn and keep in mind, you know, that we were also judged by glasses because we didn't fit in as gay and lesbians. And now there is a time where we need to take care of other people who still feel afraid to talk, because, you know, right now I'm also having really a difficult time to get trans people, non-binary people on this podcast, because it is such a hot topic, and I understand that it's very hard for the people to speak up, and I'm sorry that it is so. And as a gay man, I apologize, because, you know, that's all I can do, and I hope I can do better.
Yeah, but you're doing something magnificent and opening up a huge space. And it's not just a space in a room on one day, it's for perpetuity online, and it's fabulous. I mean, you know, hats off to you.
Thank you.
I think the issue with a lot of trans people is it's, you know, it's relatively recent that you've been able to have that identity and come out as trans. So a lot of people identifying as trans are pretty young. And it takes a long time to build up the sense of, you know, the self-actualization, if we're going to be Maslow about it. It takes a long time to build up that self-esteem and that self-confidence. And, you know, I'm 49, and it's really only been the last few years where I have the confidence and the sort of self-unity to be able to do this. And it's incredibly, incredibly hard. So I can imagine that it would be fairly terrifying for a lot of trans people to be doing this. Yes. Yeah.
And I can feel with them, you know, I feel with them, because I see, you know, how much, unfortunately, there is a lot of violence against trans people. So it's really hard, and I'm just inspired by all the trans people that do speak up. And, you know, of course, you know, the trans movement is right now where the gay movement was probably at the 80s. I don't know how to compare it, but it seems like it. So
yeah, I think there's quite a way to go. And I think queer is a more helpful moniker. I think getting rid of all these endless letters.
Yeah.
I think just queer is a more unified, and it's not kind of putting you in a box so much. I would prefer it if we just went with queer, really.
Yeah, I'd love that we get rid of boxes and labels as much as we can. I mean, queer is also a label by itself, but it's maybe a broader label where people can be just more free and individual. Yeah, unfortunately, we are just going towards, on one side, we are running away from labels. On the other side, we're running towards them and sticking them on ourselves.
Absolutely, it's just become, unfortunately, it opens you up for ridicule as well. I mean, I don't know if you've seen this. There's a group called Super Straight who have come up with a black and orange flag, and it's like taking the mick out of LGBT community. But that is the problem with constantly adding more letters and So yeah, I think having queer would maybe send out a message as well that we're one community. There's a lot of horizontal oppression goes on that's kind of totally unnecessary.
And we are different. The question is how to keep the space for difference, either for any letter and then for all the letters and just let the people be who they are. And why do we have to define ourselves? Because it's so hard to define yourself, as you said. I mean, we change as people, and so many people feel that their gender is fluid, sexuality is fluid, and so on and so on. Yeah, and it's a pity. But one more question I have is actually maybe taking you a little back to your teenage years. I mean, if you're comfortable, you can talk about yourself. But I'm also...
It's a long time ago.
No, it's not, young lady.
Why, thank you, man with hair.
Okay. I'm laughing now. I'll cry tonight.
It's good to cry.
Yeah, it's fine. Men are allowed to cry, dear listeners and viewers. So, what is the challenge? That's maybe one question I always have, because it seems like there is an extra challenge for bi teenagers, to figure out their sexuality and self-acceptance. Is that so? And maybe, there are some things that you could mention that are extra challenging for bi teenagers.
I think they'd certainly have it far easier than... I mean, I was a teenager in the 1980s, and you just didn't hear anyone talk about bisexuality.
Yeah.
It was lesbian and gay. It was lesbian and gay studies at university when I was at uni in the early 90s. Was just not talked about. So I think to a certain extent they can talk about being bi. I think the issue with teenagers is less about having places... Well, certainly in Western Europe, I am very aware it's not the case in Eastern Europe. But I think that even so, there are more organisations where you can talk about being bi than there were in my day.
Yeah.
I think the issue is more a temptation to put yourself in a box. There's a big pressure to identify and be different, whereas when I was a girl, you didn't want to stand out. You didn't want to be weird. You didn't want to have a big identity. You wanted to look like everyone else. And these days, it's almost like everyone wants to be unique. Everyone wants to have their own social media pages and their Pinterest of their hair, and this is what colour my hair is this week, and this is where I've just had a piercing, and this is where my tattoo is.
Yeah.
But allow yourself the freedom to... It's absolutely fine for your sexuality and your gender to be fluid. Don't be in a rush to say, I'm straight, or I'm gay, or I'm bi, or I'm trans. Don't be in a rush to say any of these things. That's not to deny the reality of how someone's feeling, but you don't have to pressurize yourself to have an identity. Whereas in a way, not being able to talk about it was not good, but it did give me that freedom to work through it. And I think it's almost gone the other way these days, where there's almost a social pressure to be quirky in some way or do something that's different, and don't feel you have to nail your colours to the mast. You don't have to do that. You can just say, I think this is how I feel at the moment. And that is in no way an argument against people going to gender clinics and, changing gender. It's not an argument against that. I totally support that if it's the right thing for that person. But I do think there's a pressure. Certainly the kids I teach, they feel like they have to be different in some way all the time, and they have to make a statement about themselves. And then they feel silly the week after because they don't feel like that anymore. And it's like, just be kind to yourself. Don't feel pressured. And also, whoever you go to bed with is nobody's business but yours. I did what I felt was the right thing to do, and most of my adult life. And some of it was amazing and brilliant, and I don't regret it, but some of it was excruciatingly painful. And I wished I'd had more support around me, and I wished I'd had sensible people who said, don't feel you have to go in this direction now. You don't have to choose this now. And I think it can go the other way with sexuality these days. You must you must have a tribe. And it's, I've forgotten what I was going to say, but there's almost a reverse pressure these days. Yeah. I mean, it is geographically specific. I will admit that is not the case all over Europe, but certainly, a lot of people I'm meeting in Western Northern Europe, it's very much this kind of social media world of creating an image for yourself, creating a narrative of who you are and putting yourself out there.
Well, I think even if it's not done openly, we are still under the influence. We're a global village nowadays. So we're almost watching the same things and influenced by very similar things all over the world. So I think that many people and young people can identify with what is happening right now in different ways. So what a beautiful message to end our interview for today. This is hopefully not the last time that I'll have you on here. Well, we mentioned something that there might be an interview between you and me. On the other way around.
Yeah, definitely. I want to find out all his secrets, people.
Ooh, I'm scared. Well, you already know I'm getting bold.
That's why you wear big headphones, isn't it?
Yes, I want to cover up. Yeah, I don't have money for a nice wig. Well, thank you, Carol, so much for being here and sharing your thoughts, what you wrote, what you find out. As I said, all the links will be in the podcast description, also to your books. And I will ask you if you have anything that is very useful, also some other books or anything for our viewers and listeners, please send them to me and I will put them there.
Okay.
Yes. So I want to remind you that this podcast is made in partnership with the European Forum of LGBT Christian Groups. If you want to support this podcast or the European Forum, you can find how to do it also in the podcast description below. And today I actually want to invite you to start commenting. And Carol and I have a question for you. The question that we have for you is, and please give us your comments, is have you ever seen a leaflet or heard comments or someone talk in a church setting about bisexuality? So start commenting and leave us a message. Of course, you can also leave a comment about the podcast and what you think. And if you have any ideas about some topic that you would really like to hear because it's not talked about enough, I will try and do my best to find someone to talk about it with. So thank you for being with us. See you next Monday, and until then, all I can say is bye.